virtual versus in-person sales. Which one is better? Pros and cons. Let's go. All right, so I've previously done a video about the pros and cons of a sales career. I would strongly recommend after you watch this video, you go back and watch that one. It's my most watched video of all time. And it really covers what it's like to be a salesperson, the advantages and disadvantages, the ups and the downs. It's just a reality check for anybody either considering the sales career or wondering if they should stay in this career path as well. But now that we're in the backside, it seems like, of the pandemic, I want to talk about the shift to virtual sales versus the traditional in-person sales. What's good about virtual, what's bad, what's good about in-person, what's not so good, and just really weigh my opinion of which one I think is better, or if maybe it's a combination of both. So let's start with the pros of virtual. The most obvious one is virtual sales is way more efficient. You can have 8, 10, 12 meetings in a day, back to back to back, which would be impossible if you were driving or if you were flying to a location. There's no way you could have that many meetings. So just as an efficiency tool alone, being able to have that many meetings in a single day and do that 5 days a week, it's much more efficient to sell that way. Number two, you don't have to travel, which means it's cheaper. You don't have to get in your car. You don't have to spend the gas. You don't have to hop on a plane. Your time, of course, costs money. The actual travel itself, whether it's buying plane tickets or spending the gas, the hotel rooms, if you have to pay for an event space, things like that, all of that stuff adds up. So it is way, way cheaper to sell virtually over Zoom or a Teams than it is to go in person. So now let's talk about some of the cons. I think one of the biggest cons is the fact that it's very difficult to build rapport over a screen. Right now, hopefully I'm building a little bit of rapport with you while you're watching this, but it's a lot harder to do than if I was sitting in the same room as you. If I was sitting in the same room as you, it'd be easier for us to build a relationship because I can see you. I can see if you're paying attention. You can see me. Are you smiling? Am I making eye contact? Am I sitting like this, cross-armed? Am I not open? Do I have resistance up as a prospect to what you're saying? All that stuff you can tell in person, and you can build a relationship better. Virtual does not offer as good a relationship building opportunities as in-person does. Another con of being virtual is you may not have the audience's attention at all, and you may not know that you have the audience's attention. Because guess what? When you're on a Zoom, you can mute your microphone and you can turn off your screen. Let's say I have 15 people on a call and 7 have their cameras on and the other 8 don't. Well, should I call out all 8 of those people, or should I accept that some of them aren't going to be as attentive as others? Should I make sure to talk to the people that are as attentive to me? You're not going to know for sure when you're virtual if somebody is paying attention, especially if their camera is off and they're muted. You might as well be talking to a brick wall, and that's how oftentimes I treat those situations if that's the case. Why don't we talk now about the pros of in-person, which I've already touched on a few of those by very nature of them being cons of virtual, but the relationships. And I want to go back to this. A pro, and the biggest pro in my opinion, of in-person sales is relationships. My goodness, like to just sit knee to knee with another person, to maybe even go and have lunch with them afterwards, or go have a happy hour after you have a pitch, or maybe you've gone a couple times and you talk to them in person, you talk to them over the phone, now they just want to meet you and hang out with you. Those relationships can be much deeper when you are physically present with another person. You can read their nonverbal cues, you can see what they look like in person without all those glitz and glamour of Zoom lightings and fake backgrounds and stuff like that. It's just a more human experience, which is where relationships really come from. They don't come from one side of the screen to the other. They come from being in person, touching that person, hugging them, handshakes, smelling them. Maybe they smell good, maybe they don't smell so good. I don't know. But that's all part of being human, is actually being present and physically present with another person. So another pro is you get to spend more time together. Like if I'm flying in to meet with somebody and they know I'm flying in and I got on an airplane and I crossed 3 time zones and half of my day is dedicated to them, there's going to be sort of a reciprocity that's derived from that, and they're going to want to spend time with you. It's also an effort that I'm putting forth to meet them. If I get 30 minutes on a Zoom call, I may only get 30 minutes on a Zoom call, or we may end early, and there's really no obligation from either side to necessarily continue to deepen that relationship. It's just a Zoom call. It's a little bit more superficial. So the time that you get spent together, again, reinforces that relationship building itself. The last thing that I'll touch on as a pro of in-person is trust. Our economy is based on trust. Businesses transacting with other businesses, human beings doing business with other human beings, there always is an element of trust. So in order to build real trust with another person, I think it's important to see them. I think it's important to sit in the same room as them. You get a lot of nonverbal cues and idiosyncrasies and communication that doesn't come out of their mouth, but comes from their vibe and comes from their presence and the way they sit and the way they dress. You can determine a lot better if you can trust another person when you sit in the same room as them. All right, so we do have to go down to the downsides though. What are the cons of in-person? It is freaking expensive. It is really freaking expensive. Let's use the example of me flying. If I get on an airplane and I go to Arizona, or I go to Utah, or I go to Atlanta, it's probably going to be about $400 to $600 for just a regular economy class flight. Then you've got parking at the airport. Then you've got my gas to get to the airport, the tolls again when I'm in Texas to get to the airport. Then you have the hotel. I maybe have to stay 2 days because I'm getting a couple meetings, but I couldn't get them all in one day, so I got to have them on the next day. It might cost me $1,200, $1,500, $2,000, depending on if there's entertainment and food and drinks added on top of that, just for a few meetings. So a couple $1,000s versus the cost of Wi-Fi and a Zoom on a monthly basis, there really is no comparison. And you can see why a lot of companies are shifting towards having their salespeople sell as virtually as much as possible, because from a bottom line P&L perspective, it is way cheaper to sell over Zoom than it is to have your people flying across the country in order to sell. You also can have fewer meetings in a day in person. Like I said earlier in my very first bullet point as a pro for virtual sales, I might have 10 meetings in a day, 12 meetings in a day. There's no way I can do 12 in-person meetings in a day unless they're group meetings. Somehow we have some sort of speed dating thing going on. Probably not going to happen unless it's at a conference. So the idea of having 12 meetings in a day every single day in person is just physically impossible.
It's a physical impossibility.
I'll use the example, I used to cover the Oklahoma market, Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I would drive up from Dallas. It'd take me about 3 hours to get there. If I had 4 or maybe 5 meetings in one day, that was a really jam-packed day. Because I'm driving all across the city, I'm trying to work with everybody else's calendars, and so it's just logistically almost impossible to have that many meetings in a day. So you just have to accept that you will have fewer overall sales opportunities if you're solely relying on in-person sales. And last but not least, this really comes down to scheduling. How hard is it to get somebody on the calendar in person nowadays? Are they even going into their office? Are they at home? Do we have to find a middle ground to meet with them? Scheduling people physically in person has just become a lot more challenging because, quite frankly, fewer people are as inclined to want to meet anymore. We've sort of been conditioned and trained that everything can be done virtually, so people just aren't as apt to want to meet. And so scheduling these is a lot more difficult. You usually have to look a lot more into the future in order to schedule in-person stuff, and it just becomes a little bit more cumbersome. So those are the pros and cons of virtual versus in-person sales. Now I'd like to weigh on my opinion. I think there's a place for both. I love in-person. I genuinely love it. I get so excited when I get to go fly somewhere or meet with somebody in person. It's one of my favorite things to do. One of my favorite things is to go into a broker's office and sit down with a team and just build that rapport with them physically. However, I cannot deny how much more efficient it is to sell over a computer. I sell SaaS, software as a service. I sell software. I demonstrate it virtually over a Zoom. I share my screen. It is so much more efficient. I've gotten where I've gotten very good at it that way. And so, quite frankly, I'm just better from an outcome perspective when I sell virtually than trying to do that all in person. I still want to do the in-person stuff. I definitely love it. In my preference, if I had to pick one or the other and we went all back to in-person, I would be high-fiving everybody I see if that's the case. But because I believe Zoom is here to stay, and Teams and WebEx and all those others, I think there's definitely a place to sell virtually. And I think if you're looking to get into this industry or you're already in the sales industry, you really need to adapt and adopt the virtual selling skill set. So I would highly recommend you start to develop those skills. You would embrace this. It doesn't mean we're replacing the human element at all. All we're really doing is augmenting our ability to sell, and you have to be flexible and be able to do both. So those are the pros and cons of virtual versus in-person sales. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. What do you think? Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.